Hello everybody, this is Mrs. Bennett-Morgenstern once again from my kitchen table. Going to go through the process of making some watercolor paint. This process is pretty basic in terms of what kind of paint you can make. It's the materials that you're using are a little different. So if you're making oil paint, you're using obviously oil. If you're making acrylic paint, you're using some kind of acrylic medium. So you need different materials to make different kinds of paint. But first and foremost, that you need pigments. And using a pigment is a little bit different than a dye because they're structured differently. A pigment is a colored powder that are suspended in a binder such as glue, oil, egg, or acrylic to make paint. They do not dissolve in the binder. A dye is a colored powder that dissolves in liquid. Dyes need a mordant to help them bite into another material, usually fabric. Pigments cannot be made into dyes, but dyes can be made into pigments. An example is indigo, the plant indigo, which creates a blue. And I'll explain more about this before I start making the paint. Another thing I want to show you is one of the places that you can go, and it's like going into the potions lab at Hogwarts, is go to Kremer Pigments in New York City. So if you're ever down there and you're in Midtown, you can visit their shop, and if you're interested in looking at all the cool things that go into making paint, you don't even have to buy anything. It's the only shop in the country. The other shop is actually in Germany. And I've got a couple of things from there that I'm going to show you as we keep moving on. But that's the address and the website if you want to take a look at it. Another very interesting book is something that I usually bring in during Art 1 and then Art 2 is The Brilliant History of Color by Victoria Finlay. That's a great book to have. It tells you all the histories of the different colors right up until the 21st century. All the different materials that are used to make color and so forth. Okay, just to review, we know from other videos that you need gum acacia, honey, and glycerin to make the watercolor media. These are two different versions of media that I've bought. So I don't have to make it myself. I just don't have the time to learn how to do it, but I will eventually. All right, and then you need the raw materials to actually make the pigments. And this is where it gets really interesting. There's several things just around the house that can make pigment, that can make paint. One of them, if you like to cook Indian food or from Southeast Asia, is turmeric. Turmeric is a spice. And if any of you have ever used it, okay, it has a warm orange color. Not quite, it's not a bright orange, but it definitely does stain your kitchen equipment and your pots and pans. But it's actually extremely good for you. And I'm actually going to make paint out of this some other time, not today. Other things that you can use are natural materials. Now, most pigments come from minerals, rocks, soils, okay, and they're crushed up into a fine powder. A lot of dyes nowadays, a lot of pigments nowadays come from plants and insects. And I mentioned in the past the red coming from the cochineal beetle. But I've also been collecting from around the state of Connecticut different things just in the state of Connecticut that can create pigments and dyes, okay? One of them being black walnut. They've been using black walnut shells to create dyes and pigments for probably forever. One of the first things they discovered. Even when you crack open these nuts, it leaves its stain on your hands. It's pretty strong stuff. Another thing that can create pigment that's kind of on the valuable side, which I bought a few pieces of, is lapis lazuli. This comes from, I think Iran is the main supplier of lapis now for paint production. Very long, dragged out process, but it's a really beautiful stone. Trying to get, it's blue. Really long, dragged out process in order to create the pigment. I'm going to see how I do with just smashing it up and crushing it. Over here, I have some Connecticut garnet. Okay, I've kind of picked these out of the rocks, and I have permission from the state to go collecting for rocks and minerals and other things that I want to use to make paint because I'm taking classes with them. You really can't just go ahead and go find garnet. Garnet is our state gemstone, and it's a dark red color. They use this type of garnet. This is industrial strength garnet. They use this type of garnet to make emery boards, you know, nail files, the cardboard nail files, and certain kinds of sandpaper. So it's still in use today. What else do I have here? Well, I've just been collecting some things, but you can also buy pigments that you can buy. These are some sets of pigments. And I use these, I just mix it with the gum acacia and I kind of spread it on top of my paintings to give them some glittery depth to them. But you can also add these to the paint that you're making and kind of enhance it with a little metallic look. I have 2 sets. These are something that they're kind of expensive to buy, but then you have them for decades because it's not something you use up quickly. So one of the first things that you have to do, and I'm not going to demonstrate that because it's going to take too long, is you need to take the raw materials, such as the walnut shell, smash it up, put it in like a cloth and smash it up. Try to get as much, it pounded down into the, you know, very, 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 as fine as you can just by smashing it up. And then you put it in a mortar and pestle and you grind it to even a bigger powder. Not bigger, but small, small, small powder. And you'll actually see it start to waft out of the mortar and pestle as you're doing it. And again, I'm not going to do that here, but it takes too long. Now, since many of the natural materials can cause allergies, it's always good to wear an N95 mask. And this is an old one. These are like gold right now. Hard to find. So this is something I use over and over and over because I only use it when I'm crushing up materials just in case I, you know, am allergic to it or there's some kind of poison in it that I don't know about. And the paint that I'm actually going to make today is something that I've already ground up, and it's made from lichen. And you see this stuff growing on rocks and trees all over the place. And I believe this is going to be the first time that somebody's ever tried making some paint out of it. When I ground it down, it made a very, very kind of brownish gray color. Sometimes when you start adding the vehicles together, the medium together with the powder, it can totally change how it's going to look in the future. So it has a chemical reaction. It could change the color. But since I actually use grays and browns quite a bit in my artwork, I'm perfectly happy to make that color today. Another cool thing that I'm going to be making paint out of is oak galls. And I have a couple students looking for these in the woods. If you ever find them, grab them for me and take them in. I mean, I'm sure if you went to the nature center, these are the actual protective casing for a certain kind of wasp that likes to kind of make its a casing for its eggs to protect them. And you can see the little hole here where when it hatched, it came out of the hole. These have been in use to make pigment for a long time, and I'm sure they'll grind up really, really fine. The lichen did as well. I have that already made. But yeah, I'm assuming it's going to take a lot of these in order to make enough powder to create paint out of. But they're pretty fragile. But I found a whole bunch of them over the weekend when I went hiking very close by. So here is my powder. Hopefully you can see it in there. That is the powder that I made out of the lichen. And as a side note, just for your information, lichen such as this is used in the production of perfume. And I did notice it when I was crushing it up, even through the mask. I could smell kind of a pleasant, musky odor. I believe it's in Chanel No. 5, which is a pretty famous perfume. So, on to making the paint. What I have here is a piece of glass that has a section kind of scratched into it. How did you do that, Mrs. Bennett? Well, silicon carbide. Silicon carbide is a little bit different than your average sandpaper. Okay, it's the only kind of sandpaper that's going to cut into glass. And I also do glass cutting for other projects, and that is what you see on a glass cutter that you're going to cut a bottle or the actual pane of glass or to make stained glass. This is what's on the tip, the silicon carbide. So I just sprinkled it in there, and then I kind of scratched it in using a very important tool for the making of all paints by hand. This is called a muller, M-U-L-L-E-R, and it's kind of heavy. Now, very professional artists that make their own paint every day have all different sizes of these, all different kinds of handles. Some of them are worth $200 and $300. I think this one came with the set that I bought. You know, this is probably like maybe $35. It's not very heavy, but you know, for what I need to do, that's all I need to do. I also have some plastic pipettes. Okay, for those of you who are taking chemistry, you might have used these in the lab or even bio lab or, you know, even earth science or general science. Nifty thing to have, and then you can just throw them right away. Plastic spoon. And when I work with this, doing this in my kitchen, again, I wear my mask till it starts to mix together. And when I clean with a rag or a paper towel. I don't use any of my kitchen items to do any of the cleaning with because you don't want any of the chemicals to get into your sink or on any surfaces that you are going to eat from, just to be on the safe side. So a little safety precautions in case you're interested in it. So I'm going to use the good medium. And I am going to put on my mask, so if my voice sounds kind of weird, it's because I'm speaking through my N95 mask. I'm not going to be wearing it the whole time, just to get the powder out. So this is from Shield Lichen, which is what I showed you. I'm going to use my plastic spoon. And this is pretty finely ground. I'm picking this because I did a pretty good job. So I'm just taking a teaspoon out. That's all I'm going to make today because it's kind of time consuming. Put that over in the sink. Save the rest of that. I mean, lichen is everywhere. It's not like I'm going to run out of it. You just have to wait till it dries out completely. I'm going to take my pipette. I'm actually going to shake this a little bit. Now the idea is that you're not mixing the pigment and the medium together. You're trying to get them forced so each little platelet, each little piece of powder is going to be attached to the medium, and they're kind of sliding over each other. The transparency of the watercolor paint depends on how much medium and how much pigment is in there. If there's a lot of pigment, the paint's going to be very dense. If there's more powder, denser paint. More medium, more transparent the paint. That makes sense. Okay. I'm going to get my little container ready. Little plastic container to put the watercolor paint in. And it's pretty liquid once you're done with it. So you have to let the watercolor paint cure for a couple of days, 24 to 48 hours. The last stuff I made took a long time, so, because it was really dense. So get my little pipette, shake this up again. This stuff is not toxic at all. There's nothing in it that's dangerous, okay? So even, you know, I wouldn't want it all over my kitchen table, but it's really not gonna hurt anybody. It's the pigments that can be kind of. So I'm gonna start with 25 milliliters. It's good to keep track how much you're putting in. Whoops, kind of slid away. I have my palette knife. I should have made a little well and then it wouldn't have ran all over the place. Oh boy, this was way too much pigment, but we'll be okay. Get some more. Make a little well. There. Now this, I really haven't done much. I'm just trying to get this so the pigment is all soaked with the medium. So it won't be powdery anymore, and I can take this mask off because this really bothers me wearing it. I don't wear one of these when I go out. I have my own homemade mask from a bandana because this is torture for me. I can't breathe. There we go. Now it's starting to get a little sticky. Little chunky. This is good, pretty good powder though that I made though. I'm pretty impressed with how very fine it is. I can just see a couple of chunky parts where I didn't grind it as well. Okay, now I can take the mask off. Ugh, horrible. Okay, going to just use this palette knife to centralize all of the it's a little thick, so I'm just going to add a few more drops to it. Ooh, that's an interesting color. I will definitely be using this in my artwork. Okay, get that out of the way. Now I'm going to get my muller. You want to mull on where you have it sanded, so the surface of the glass is helping to kind of push all of the pigment and the medium together. And there's like a suction action. And it's kind of not the best sound in the world. Well, this color is going to save me a lot of time when I'm doing my paintings because it's something that I actually use a lot. It doesn't smell very good right now though, I can tell you that. Try to scrape as much as you can and make sure that you don't waste anything because, you know, the time consuming part of this is making the pigment. The silicon carbide spot where it's all ground down on the glass is actually helping break down any big chunky pieces that I may have left as I was making the pigment in the mortar and pestle. Now, I don't mind having this be very, very dense and dark, because the nature of watercolor is that you add water to the paint in order to lighten up the color. So you don't really have to worry about it being overly thin. It just makes it a little easier to spread around and get mulled together if it's a little more liquid. You see that it's the suction action is kind of making my mulling surface, the glass, move around. Okay, one more time. Trying to get as much of this mixed together as I can. I was going to be taking workshops at Kremer, but because of everything that happened, they, you know, being in New York City especially, they had to cancel everything. Too bad. This is something that I'm really interested in doing on my own. Making my own paint, especially out of the same materials that I'm using to do the artwork, the subject matter. Use the subject matter to make the paint. Okay, good enough for today's demonstration. Here's the tricky part. I'm probably going to need a couple of these. I'm going to take my little and get it into the watercolor little palette, little extra that I have here. Do another one. Don't want to waste any of it. And give this extra away to somebody. And like I told you in my other videos, watercolor lasts a pretty long time. But if you know how to make it and you're making your own colors, you'll never run out. Because again, it's an expensive thing to buy sometimes, some of the equipment, and spending the time making the pigments. But because watercolor paint in and of itself lasts so long, you know, it's a good investment. Get a paper towel. Put it on my fingers. And that's it. One last thing I want to show you is I bought this just on Amazon. It's a neat little container where you can put your own watercolor paint in. And you have 2 palettes. You can carry the small thing of water with you and some brushes. They don't weigh anything. So a little portable set of watercolor paint. And again, these are made to replace very easily. So once these are dry and I test them out, and put them in my set of homemade watercolor paint that I made from things that I found around the state of Connecticut. Here is some homemade watercolor paint. I actually bought these down at Kremer. This is the indigo. I mentioned that earlier. So here's the indigo in the container, and this is what it looks like, kind of like in a value scale. Okay, so indigo is one of those materials like black walnut that is also a dye. A dye made into a pigment. It's again, a kind of a dragged out process to create that. And hopefully you enjoyed watercolor and watching all these videos. I'm going to move on to something else the next time I make a video. So please, if you have any questions, give a yell, send me an email, and we'll see you next time.